Welcome to the lecture on Systems Thinking for Sustainable Development. We know that the different aspects of sustainability, the economic, the technological, the legal aspects are all interlinked. And in this lecture, we want to learn about the framework for how we can bring these different aspects together and study them and their interrelations in a systematic manner. We will also link this framework to the metabolism of societies, so their energy and material turnover, and see how that relates to sustainability. And we will understand that sustainability is a property of a system, not a property of the individual elements or people or products in the system. We know that human environmental interactions are part of a complex system. There are so many interrelation between consumption and production, between services and energy use, between energy supply and environmental impacts and human health. So all these interactions need to somehow be captured. We need to manage them. We can't just ensure sustainability by focusing on small aspects of the system only, so we need always to keep the broader picture of sustainability and of the system in mind when talking about how we can achieve sustainability by individual strategies. The basic concept that we use is the concept of complex autopoietic systems. So what is that and why is it needed? We describe our society and its interaction with the environment as a system which is a set of interacting and interdependent components. Components here are the industries, the people, the markets, the ecosystems. They are all interlinked by emissions, resource use, trade relationship, and so on. This system is clearly very complex in the sense that it shows chaotic behavior, spontaneous order formation. Think about international organizations or think about ecosystems. We have feedback mechanisms. We have adaptive capacities. For example, now in this corona crisis, societies can adapt, ecosystems can adapt to certain losses and impacts. And all these types of behaviors are described as non-linear. So there is definitely a reaction of the systems that's not proportional to the distortion of the system, but the systems show new features that emerge as the systems change over time. The systems we study are autopoietic. So this is just a fancy word for systems that can reproduce and maintain themselves. We will see examples in a minute. So the systems are not only complex, but have achieved such a high degree of complexity that they can reproduce themselves over time. The best example is, of course, ecosystems, where new trees grow, new organisms are formed, old ones die, and overall the systems reproduces and maintains itself over time, and so it maintains a certain adaptive capacity to changing environmental conditions. Systems theory is a complement to social and natural sciences. So in a way, it is underlying both scientific fields so that we can bring them together on a common denominator and talk about the same objects and relations. So this is what system theory is made for. And we will now continue with applying it to the case of sustainability. First, two examples of systems. On the left side, you see an oil refinery, and on the right side, a coral reef ecosystem. We would argue that both systems show clear signs of complexity, in a sense that there's strong linear dynamics, they have some adaptive capacity, and also emerging properties that can help them adapt to changing environmental conditions or changing supply and demand conditions in the case of the refinery. But we would argue that only the coral ecosystem is autopoietic in the sense that it has all the resources and mechanisms in place that it can reproduce and maintain itself. Because the corals can maintain themselves, they are a continuously living species, the same with the fish around and the other animals in the sea. The refinery, on the contrary, cannot maintain itself. It needs people and it needs other industries. There needs to be a steel industry that supplies it with new pipes. There needs to be a computer industry that supplies us with new control equipment. So although the refinery is a complex system, it is not complex enough or not comprehensive enough to actually maintain itself. It needs to be embedded in a larger industrial system. This is one of the key differences between industrial assets and natural ecosystems. Sustainability has two major components. There is a social component to it and there is a natural or an environmental component to it. So to study sustainability in a systems context, we need a very broadly defined system, and this is called the socio-ecological system. It is a system where we have both biophysical and social factors or actors or components in them. For example, biophysical components are natural resources and ecosystems, or the climate. Social factors are humans, their needs and wants, companies, or organizations like nation states or regions. And all they interact together in that complex autopoietic socio-ecological system. A similar term is the coupled human and natural system, which for the purpose of this lecture can be seen as a synonym for a socio-ecological system. So the idea is really we have a human component and a natural component that co-evolves over time and interacts strongly with each other. If we take those two spheres or components, the biophysical reality and the social reality, we can conceptualize the socio-ecological system as a two-sphere model. We have two types of reality that are interlinked. We have the biophysical reality, the ecosystems, the industrial assets, the material and energy flows that are mainly governed by the rules of physics. And we have the social reality that works differently, because here we have human actors that have some sort of freedom and free will to engage in relationships, to form new concepts like freedom, democracy, friendships that are not directly determined by physical laws, but that emerge from the freedom of the social actors. And in the middle, we have the overlap between the two spheres. This is the part of the system that's both biophysically real and it's a social concept, and it's part of the social reality. For example, a car. A car is a biophysical object. It has a material composition. It has certain properties that describe how it functions physically. But a car is also a social or economic object. It's owned by somebody and it's maintained and operated by somebody. So these objects that are in the middle of the system, in the intersection between the two spheres, have both a biophysical component and a social component. And they are, of course, at the core of the sustainability challenge, because here we have the objects that provide a service to people, because they're part of the social reality and are owned and operated by people. At the same time, they are part of the biophysical reality, because they need materials and energy for their function and their build-up. So we have different components of the socio-ecological systems in the two spheres. We have people, households, industry, markets, governments, or ecosystems. And all of them have a role to play on the biophysical layer. So for example, markets organize transport and storage, but they also have a function at the social layer. For example, markets are there for exchange of commodities and services and for price formation. The same double function we have for all the other components, and you can read them here on the slide. Within the socio-ecological systems, there's a large number of relationships between the different components. So here in this table, we have on the lower half the biophysical relationships in green, and on the upper half we have the social relationships in red. For example, there's a relation between industries and governments that's of social kind. So this is where regulation and lobbying takes place. Or we have biophysical relationships between ecosystems and people, and this is where recreation takes place, when people go out to enjoy the nature. So you can see that there is a possibility to map the different relations we have between the components of the socio-ecological system, and we can also divide them into two types, whether it's a biophysical relationship or a social relationship. We can now zoom into the two-sphere model of socio-ecological system and define the so-called control threshold. When you think of us as human society, we often see ourselves as being separate from the natural environment. And this separation is actually not defined by a fixed boundary, but it's a gradual transition from things that we own and control and things that are governed by nature. So there is a control threshold between the built environment and the natural environment. And everything that is within the overlap of the natural and the social sphere of causation, and that is within the control threshold, this is what we call the socioeconomic metabolism or the biophysical structures of society. So there are two types of objects within this sphere. First, we have structures, like our own bodies. We have the products in use, and we have the infrastructure. So this is all the stuff that is in place and that is around so we can use it. And the structure needs a metabolism to operate. So we have an energy material throughput through the cars, through the buildings, through our own bodies. And this helps to operate and maintain these structures. So there's two things, metabolism and structure. Again, examples. Structure here is the objects or artifacts that constitute the system. So they are objects and stocks, in-use stocks that are there. And they provide the service. For example, on the right side you have the buildings and the roads, and they provide the shelter, the thermal comfort, the transport space, and so on. But they can't do this alone because they need to be operated to be able to provide the service. The buildings need to be heated, the cars need to be driven. And this operation of stocks or of the structures is called a metabolism. Similarly, we can say that our own bodies have a metabolism. So this is when we burn food to harvest the energy or harvest the materials, the sugar, and so on, to build up our own bodies and to function. So we have the body and the functioning of the bodies as two different things. The body is the structure, the functioning is the metabolism. Here again, a visualization of the structures and metabolism at a society level. So structures are objects that are there, and metabolism is the operation of those structures. So we can define this metabolism in a specific way. You can read this definition here. It's more or less a condensation of what I just explained. Socioeconomic metabolism has two components. First, we have the processes. So the industrial and other societal processes that transform energy and material into something useful. For example, we have mining processes, we have energy supply processes, transport processes, material production, waste management, food supply, water supply, cities. All these entities can be conceived as processes that have an energy material turnover where something useful is at the end. Out of mining comes ore that can be then smelted into materials in material production. Out of cities comes communication, work, leisure activity, human well-being. The processes are connected to each other by flows, which is the second major component of socioeconomic metabolism. We have flows of transmission of energy, trade flows, we have emissions flow or discharge to the environment, we have resource uptake. So processes and flows together constitute the metabolism of our society. So putting it all back into one picture, we can say that socioeconomic metabolism is the driver of global environmental change, because it's the operation of our society, of our industry, that extracts all the resources from the natural environment and this discharges all the emissions and wastewater and so on. So it's the driver of global environmental change. At the same time, society's metabolism provides all the services that we need for human well-being, the transport, the shelter, the food, the security, and so on. We need to understand how socioeconomic metabolism or society's metabolism will look like in the future, in a sustainable future. What does sustainability mean in terms of service provision? How many transport options will there be? How many cars? What food will people eat? How will they travel? How will they live? How will they work? How will they spend their free time? And so on. This is the service level of socioeconomic metabolism. The second question we have to ask ourselves is, how will the services be provided? What products will there be? Will there be high-rise buildings? Will there be futuristic transport mode? Or will people just walk and cycle? And so on. Then, how will the energy and materials be supplied in the future? Will there be a lot of recycling, or will we use all organic materials that we can throw away into nature and trees will grow from them, or maybe even other opportunities? And finally, how many emissions will there be to the environment? How will we manage our ecosystems, and how can we make sure that ecosystems can also thrive next to a thriving socioeconomic metabolism? A main role in this whole picture is played by renewable energy. So we need to understand, in the context of energy and sustainable development, what is the relation between energy and renewable energy in particular and socioeconomic metabolism. What is the relation between renewable energy and sustainability in general, and how can we understand what renewable energy has to say regarding weak and strong sustainability. Just a few examples here. We know that renewable energies don't come without environmental impacts. We need to use land, we need to use resources, so we also have to consider the environmental impacts of renewable energy supply, even though it has a green image and maybe a sustainable image. But it doesn't mean that they come burden-free. There's also costs associated with renewable energies. So somebody needs to invest in them, there needs to be a stable legal framework for investing in them, and also they need to be good business models. So you can see just from these two examples that renewable energy are just not a thing that happens, but it needs to be actively researched and also managed to make sure that renewable energies actually contribute to sustainable development. Very broadly speaking, we can say that the sustainability transformation of socioeconomic metabolism has 4 different levels. And the levels are of increasing system scope, so to say. First, we have the process, product, or per capita level. So we can think of improving the system towards a more sustainable state at the process and product level. For example, by improving the energy and material efficiency of production processes. We can make combustion engines more energy efficient. We can make houses more energy efficient, or we can redesign houses to use different types of material. We can try to decrease our own carbon footprint, so this would be a sustainability measure at the per capita level, for example, by eating less meat or flying less. But the process and product level itself is not the systems level yet, right? Just because we have one passive house or the concept of passive house exists doesn't mean that the world suddenly is sustainable. We need to scale up things. And when we want to scale up things, we need to consider the other levels of the system. The next level on top of the process level is the process cluster level. Industries don't operate in isolation from each other. Industries form an industrial network, and we need to make sure that those industrial network as a whole move on to a sustainable state. We can, for example, see that some industries produce waste streams that are useful inputs to other industries. A good example is that power plants who create waste heat can actually supply that waste heat to, for example, paper mills who can use it to dry paper, or to fish farms who can use it to heat the fish ponds. This process is called industrial symbiosis. Or we can have a biorefinery that creates press cake from extracting oil from seeds, and this press cake can be used as animal fodder. So there's a link between biorefineries and agriculture. At the process cluster level, we can optimize a lot. Even though a single industry may not be very energy and material efficient, the whole cluster can be, because the waste of one industry is the raw material of another industry. But again, even though this is very crucial and helpful, it doesn't make the system sustainable yet, because even though we have very efficient process clusters, we can still exceed planetary boundaries or national emissions target. So we need to move up one ladder and consider also the product life cycles and the global supply chains and the material cycles. So we need to understand whether or not the whole system of production and global supply chains and of material cycle operates at a level where we can say, hey, this is in line with resource extraction targets or with planetary boundaries. We can make sure that we keep the supply chains free of child labor or of adverse environmental impacts from certain mining operations. So this is a very comprehensive system scope, because in a globalized economy, supply chains span across the entire world, and it's very difficult to manage from the point of consumption all the way up to the resource extraction. And even if we succeed in doing that, we are not there yet. We don't have sustainability yet, because in the final stage of sustainable transformation, we need to think about the whole system level. We need to think and quantify whether society as a whole achieves its social goal and also lives within the planetary boundaries that are given. So everything at the levels 1, 2, 3 needs to be scaled up to the right extent. The current lifestyle is not sustainable. It creates global inequality, and at the same time it deteriorates global environmental ecosystem quality. So there needs to be a transformation at the process level 1, at the cluster level 2. We need to transform supply chains and material cycle 3, and ultimately we need to make sure that everything fits well together at the systems level, that we achieve at the national level and also globally both our social targets and environmental targets at the same time. Here's some more examples of the 4 systems level. We already talked about passive houses, so we would say that at the product level, the basic indicator is efficiency. We want individual products and processes to become more efficient. And a lot of development and also a lot of business development and technology development happens at this stage. It's the basic requirement, the starting point for sustainability and sustainable development. But we need to move further. We need to then see how we can link efficient processes to each other to become even more efficient at the cluster level. We need to facilitate reuse of waste energy and waste streams at the industrial cluster level to form so-called eco-industrial parks. We need to understand that global supply chains determine sustainability performance of service provision. Here is the example of electric transportation. Even though you have a very efficient electric vehicle, it doesn't mean it's a climate-friendly solution yet, because the overall climate impact of electric transportation depends on the electricity mix. So here we have a good example for the life cycle perspective, where we need to think product choice and energy supply in combination. So we see from these graphs that the countries that have a very carbon intensive energy supply have a very bad performance of electric transportation in terms of climate change. The countries with a high hydropower share or other renewable and low carbon energy share have a very good performance. So we see that in the future, different sectors of the economy and society have to be transformed together. We can not only transform the vehicle fleet or only transform the energy supply. We need to transform both together to form a sustainable development strategy that actually works. And even though we do that, we need to think that there are other effects at the system level that determine the overall outcome of individual sustainable development strategies. And the most crucial effect that we have are the so-called rebound effects. So imagine you become more efficient in one part of the system. That means you have more resources available in other parts of the system. So if your car is more efficient, you need to spend less gasoline and spend less money to go around by car. That means you will have money available for other services. So you could save that money and fly to a new holiday in Spain. By doing that, you have increased your personal benefit, but you have actually decreased global environmental quality because your overall emissions budget increases. So the big challenge of sustainable development actually lies at the system level. How can we make sure that the reductions in energy and material consumption that we can achieve by becoming more efficient at the process and product level actually translates into total reduction of global energy, material use, and greenhouse gas emissions and other environmental impacts. So this is the major challenge. We not only must transform individual product and processes, we must transform the system as a whole, including lifestyles, including legal framework and business models, to make sure that these rebound effects all point into a direction that is overall healthy for sustainability, overall healthy for society and for the environment. And with this broad overview and the 4 levels of sustainable development, I want to close this lecture. Thank you.